Welcome to episode 61 of the Epic Classroom Podcast. I'm Trevor Muir, and this is where we explore how to make learning meaningful, dynamic, and transformative. Epic, so students don't just get through school, they thrive because of it. All right, welcome back to the podcast. I'm really excited about this episode. It's called The Myth of Shrinking Attention Spans and Reclaiming Student Focus. And it's inspired by something I noticed last week when I was guest teaching a college writing class. So if I'm going to be honest with you, when I was asked to go and teach this class, I was kind of excited about it because I love writing and I love teaching writing. But also I expected a bunch of college freshmen taking an 8 a.m. class to be on their phones the whole time. I thought it was going to be like pulling teeth to get them to talk or work, especially as I was not their regular professor. I didn't have a whole lot of ways to hold them accountable. A guest teacher doesn't have a whole lot of discipline power. Are you with me? But also, because this is what you hear so often about students, the narrative is familiar by now. Today's kids are dopamine-craving zombies, especially freshmen in college, especially adolescents. They're unable to look up from TikTok or Fortnite long enough to do their schoolwork and engage, right? The constant inundation of technology and media and social media has shrunken the modern child's attention span. And as a result, we've had to do a lot of shifting about what school looks like. I mean, nearly half of U.S. states have banned cell phones in school, right? Worried that they're going to rob attention from schoolwork. Teachers, and I talk to them all the time, this is true, teachers everywhere describe students who seem distracted and unwilling and unable to engage. That's the key word. I hear it all the time, and you hear it not just from teachers and educators, you hear it from parents, you hear it from politicians and policymakers, that students have changed, that they're unable to pay attention anymore. And it's to blame all of this technology and all of the distraction, everything that exists. So that's what we're going to talk about. I want to take a quick little break and plug something that I want to make sure that you have access to. I've created something called the Collaboration Toolkit. And it's just a collection of my favorite resources to lead great, strong, collaborative group work. And I made it a while ago when I wrote my book, The Collaborative Classroom. Well, I just went back and I retooled it and shifted some things around and strengthened it up and added some new design to it. And so it's available right now. It is completely free. It's just a Google Drive folder, essentially, with my very favorite collaboration tools. And you don't have to have any fancy technology to use it. But I'm telling you, it really helps students focus and stay productive and work well with their classmates. So if you want the collaboration toolkit, all you have to do is click the link that I will put in the show notes and you can get it there. It's completely free, I promise. And so I just want to make sure that you have that. I've been working on that the last couple of weeks, kind of just tuning it up a little bit. So wanted to just plug that in there. Now let's go back and talk about students being unable to focus and stay attention, right? Like, listen, there is truth to all of that. That was my expectation with those students. That's what I've seen in my own classrooms, especially in the last few years, and it's what I've heard from educators all over the place. These points are true, or at least they contain some truth. But something doesn't add up when we blame attention spans shrinking, right? I led a writing lesson. So when I was there, I was leading this writing lesson, and I started my lesson by sharing a vulnerable story from when I was in middle school. And I got into it. And there were some funny moments mixed in, like showing a picture of myself, my class picture when I was in 7th or 6th grade, dressed as the crocodile hunter, even though it was not dress up day. I just thought that was cool looking, right? Like I was a little self-deprecating at first. I started with a vulnerable story and it made it funny. But then I also bared a bit of my soul, right? Like I told them about my parents' divorce and the impact some teachers had on me and how this inspired me to pay attention during writing in 6th grade class and all of the impact that had on me. And then once I had these students hooked in this writing class I was teaching in this college class, I shifted the conversation, the lesson, into structure, and the lesson turned much more academic. And so for the last 20 minutes of the class, I asked the students to write about a formative moment from their own lives, but they had to use the discussed structure I talked about. And you know what? I didn't witness that famed drop in attention span. These students were locked in the whole time, right? They were with me. They had their workout and they were working, and I walked around the room and I could not find one student not on task, and yet they were doing academic writing in the 8 o'clock hour. And I think that's because of what they were asked to focus on. It's not that they couldn't focus, it's what I was asking them to focus on. Right, starting off this lesson with a story and some vulnerability, one investment from these students. They were able to make the connection between real life and the content that we were going to cover. And when we transitioned to writing about themselves, the engagement naturally followed. They wanted to engage with this content. Essentially, relevance promoted focus. When students cared, they engaged. When they didn't, their attention slipped. Now, you might say, well, I used to teach content that wasn't always relevant or personal, but students stayed on task despite all of that. Kids have changed, right? And I've heard that a lot, and I get it. Absolutely. This might be partially true, right? Students' focus in school may have shifted, right? Like I remember growing up not being inspired by a lot of the content my teachers covered. And yet I also was much more focused than many students I've had myself. And I think you can go even prior to my own generation, and you go back and it was even more and more and more. So like this is partially true. Maybe the way students focus has changed, but it's not due to change in their attention spans. It's not about their ability to focus. You know, I read this 31-year study of 179 reports that these researchers looked at using something called the D2 test of attention, which is a really common test for attention span. And they found that little, if any, decline has happened in students' attention spans in the last 30 years. This study was from the years 1990 to 2021, and there has been no variation in the ability of a student to focus. Right, like the technology has changed, school has changed, the world has changed, politics has changed, what's distracting students, what exists in the world, that's all changed. But children's ability to focus has not actually changed. What has changed is the motivation to stay focused. That's a really key distinction there. So the human brain, the child's brain, the adolescent's brain has not shifted. Their ability to focus and pay attention is intact. But what has changed is that motivation to stay focused. There's a relevance gap between students and school. 30 years ago, there was a clearer purpose for school. You know, for one, school was where students went for information primarily. You know, you want to learn about the Amazon rainforest? Learn about it in school, right? Are you looking for a new novel? Go to the school library. You want to learn how to play an instrument? Well, we have a band class for that. Well, now, the information of the world is at our students' fingertips, and that type of access is merely a click away, right? Like, why go to band class to learn an instrument when I can go on YouTube to do that? Why go on Amazon? Why learn about the Amazon rainforest in this long, boring class when I can just go on ChatGPT and ask it about it, right? Like, the information of the world is at our students' fingertips. And so they ask, why sit in a classroom 5 days a week for information I can find on my phone? Now, this doesn't mean they actually have the learning opportunities of school at their fingertips. I want to make that loud and clear. Of course, they can't meaningfully learn all of the information that's offered by educators completely on their own, right? Guidance and expertise and passion and mentorship, that is all still essential, right? Right, like you can't learn everything meaningfully just on your phone or just on a laptop. But do students know that? Do they understand the value of their education? Do they understand why it's important for them to be there? Right? In the past, the benefit of an education was much clearer to students. They knew, and I remember knowing this growing up when I was bored in class and I didn't want to work, but I knew, or at least from what I was told over and over and over, and what I saw from my own parents and my own family, is that engaging in school equals more success in life. Success in elementary school leads to success in middle school, which leads to success in high school, which leads to success in college, which promises a successful career. Well, this path is no longer guaranteed. College no longer guarantees prosperity. You know, with rising tuition and student debt and underemployment of college grads and, the getting a diploma has made the payoff less certain in students' eyes. And yet so much of K-12 education is oriented to getting that diploma. Well, for many students, the promise of a successful life because of their education doesn't grab their focus as much as the other things vying for their attention. Are you with me, right? Like there used to be a time where it's like, yeah, you go to college, well, then you get a job that can sustain your family. That's not necessarily true anymore. And so if that is not what's grabbing students' attention, well, then what is? Cell phones and video games and a constant barrage of media, that's stealing students' focus. However, it's not because students are incapable of focusing. It's that for many students, school has not made a strong enough case to steal that attention back, right? Why put in the effort of writing a research paper when no one can explain to me why I need to know how to write research papers, right? Like the old adage used to be like, well, you're going to write plenty of papers, you're going to write essays, you're going to have to do informational writing someday when you grow up. Well, I don't know if that's true. I mean, I'm a professional writer, and so I guess I have. But none of my friends are really authors, or not most of them, and they don't do a whole lot of essay writing in their life. You know, students might ask, why should I give another 2 hours of my life to homework when I don't even know why I'm learning math in the first place, right? Why should I stop using my phone in class when I've already decided I don't want to go to college? These are the questions students are asking. If you are an educator out there, which I'm guessing you're somehow tied to the education system if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably heard these questions, and I think they're valid ones to ask. I also think each of them have valid answers. Of course, there's still value in writing research papers, and there's value in math class, and explaining that value should be a regular task for educators, right? Like I've talked about this before in past podcasts, right? We don't just learn math so that we know how to factor polynomials our whole lives. We're learning math because it strengthens our prefrontal cortex and gives us stronger problem-solving abilities the rest of our lives. And math difficulties help strengthen that. It's about neuroplasticity and automaticity. Like there's a value to it. And I think it needs to be a part of an educator's job to articulate that purpose, but that can be frustrating for many educators, right? Having to justify lessons and tasks was not the norm for most educators in the past, right? The expectation was, well, you do the work because I said so, and because that's what you do between the ages of 5 and 18. However, providing justification, it's the reality, right? I don't know if you've seen this really excellent interview in the New York Times with Brene Brown recently. She says in it, this is just a quote from it. It's a really good one. I will link it into the show notes as well. Although I've also written a whole new article or really an essay myself on this topic, and I've got it linked in there. I will definitely make sure that's in the show notes as well. But what Brene Brown, who's just brilliant, she says, what I've noticed about this generation, and Brene Brown isn't just a listener, she's also a researcher. And so what she's gathered from her career and her experience in parenting herself, she says, what I've noticed about this generation, they're not doing anything without the why. Why are we doing it this way? Why is that going to be helpful? So that's her quote. And I bet you've seen it as well. I know I've seen it in my own kids. Why do I need to do this? Why do I have to do it this way? Why do I need to do homework? And again, that can be frustrating because it's like, well, because I said so, or because that's what you do in school. But that's not working to answer like that anymore. As frustrating as it might be, this generation wants to know the why. But again, I don't think this is a flaw in the students that they want to know the why. Instead, it's a result of the world they grew up in. Right? From a distrust in institutions that fail in their promises to the constant bombardment of stimuli and today's students, what they've had to grow up with, all of the media and information and technology and distraction and temptation around them with so many things competing for their eyes. Anything that tries to pull them away from that is going to be questioned. Now, this maybe will lead to better critical thinking in this generation. I think we could all agree our society could use a nice, strong dose of critical thinking, but also a generation of students who will not jump just because the teacher said so. They will not just do something because authority said so. Will not write just because there's a grade book. Will not work just because they're in school. So what do we do? Like, this is a conundrum. So what do we do? Well, if we want students to focus and give the attention we know they are capable of to their education, everything taught needs to be run through a purpose filter. One, what is the purpose of what I'm teaching? And 2, how can I make the task I assign more purposeful? So that, to me, that's the purpose filter. What is the purpose of what I'm teaching? And how can I make the task I assign more purposeful? Well, so for number 1, what is the purpose of what I'm teaching? If we can't answer that question, if we can't articulate why a piece of content or its corresponding assignment has value, then I'm not sure why it belongs in the classroom, right? I'm not sure why it belongs in the curriculum if we can't tell students clearly why they need to know that information, why they need to develop that skill, why they need to use that technology. If we can't answer it, then why are we teaching it? And I think that's something we could consider here for a bit. For instance, I used to teach grammar by having students diagram sentences. And I got to tell you, my students dreaded those lessons. And by the way, when I was in 11th grade, that's how my teacher taught grammar, was diagramming, and I dreaded them as well. Because myself and students knew that the only place in their entire lives that they would ever diagram a sentence was in my class. That's not something you do in the real world. If a student asked me why they have to draw slanted lines for modifiers, my only reasonable answer was because it'll be on the quiz, right? That doesn't work. Then a veteran teacher gave me this book. If you're a grammar teacher, an English teacher, I would definitely check it out. It's called Grammar Matters: Lessons, Tips, and Conversations Using Mentor Texts. So I read this book, and it's all about teaching grammar in context and helping students learn syntax while in the act of writing something that they enjoy. And so I changed up my grammar instruction, and all of a sudden there was this massive engagement shift. My reasoning for teaching with diagrams is because that is what I knew, not because it was necessarily a best practice. When it became clear that there was a better, more meaningful way to teach it, students responded accordingly. They could see the value of the learning. And then for number 2, how can I make the tasks I assign more purposeful? It's about considering the intrinsic and extrinsic rewards that are with a task, right? Plenty of research shows, and I've shared it plenty of times, but I'm going to keep sharing it. Plenty of research shows that there is a higher level when there's a higher level purpose to a task, right? When there is a good reason for doing something and students know what that reason is, when it benefits something beyond just themselves, beyond just the grade book, it has this measurable benefit to a student's engagement. And this is true across grade levels and content areas. And this is why I'm such a proponent, why I'm a big fan of methodologies like project-based learning. Right? The University of Southern California conducted a huge research study showing even students in AP classes, which is like traditionally so sequenced and so rote and so scripted traditionally, they found that students in AP classes score higher on the AP exam when their learning was conducted in a PBL, a project-based learning environment. When students know their work is contributing to something bigger than themselves, they give more attention to it. They care more about it. In a typical AP literature classroom studying The Catcher in the Rye, the routine often looks like this. Students read a chapter. The teacher delivers a lecture on theme, for instance. The class engages in discussion. Students complete a short literary analysis, and then they take a quiz. And then the next day, they move on to the following chapter, and then they repeat the process. And the primary objective of this sequence would be for the students to learn the material well enough to remember the content and perform the same type of literary analysis well enough to do it again on the AP exam at the end of the year. Right? Listen, there's nothing inherently wrong with this sequence. I was an AP Lit student in high school, and I went and took AP Lit in college, or I took literature classes in college, and it's like, this is how we did it. There's nothing completely wrong with this. But I tell you, as soon as students stop caring about that test at the end, which, by the way, lots of students don't care about those college entrance exams nearly as much as they used to. Right? I've talked to so many high school seniors who said they are going test optional for college. They're not even using the standardized test scores to get into college anymore. So like when that motivation, that carrot isn't dangling there anymore, it kind of all starts to fall apart. And as a result, students don't learn literary analysis the way that we want them to, the way that they need to have a rich understanding of how to do it. Right? There's nothing wrong with it, but it all falls apart. Now, what if the teacher of that class told students at the beginning of the unit that the novel they're about to read is one of the most consistently banned books in American history? And then as they study, they'll be deciding if the banning is appropriate or not. Should we ban this book or not? Should we ban any books, right? Giving them something little controversial, something to chew on here. And then they tell them, hey, at the end of this, when we're done with all of this work, you're going to write an op-ed that we're going to submit to a major publication arguing for or against banning these types of books. Now, this task still teaches literary analysis, right? It's still doing that core work that prepares them for the AP exam. Only now there's a defined purpose for it. There's a reason to do a literary analysis. There's now an audience for student work, as well as the potential for them to make an impact in the world with what they're learning in school. Now that is worth giving your attention to. I mean, because I'll just say it again, the world's changed. Technology's become more powerful. Society's become more distracting. And all of this is competing for the attention of young minds. And the ramifications of this is obvious in schools. So does this mean school needs a complete transformation, a total departure from how things have always been done? Do we need to stop math class? Do we need to stop literary analysis? Do we need to make school fun all the time? Is that the answer? Or do we just throw up our hands and declare phones and video games as champions of students' attention? Are they the winners of all this? Do we give up? No, of course not. Instead, our job is to show students why their education is worth the effort. We have to articulate the value of each task. We have to discard the work that lacks it. And we need to design lessons and units and learning experiences with more meaning embedded into them. Students can still focus. It's still possible. We just have to give them something worth their attention. So, if you want to engage deeper with this, I'm doing a whole video lecture on this topic that's going to be followed by some discussion questions. So if this is something you want to do with your teaching team or the staff that you work on, or if you just want to engage with this material yourself, that will be on YouTube, and I will make sure to link that into this episode as well, so you can go engage with the video version. There's also an article that has links to all of the research and studies that I talked about here. You can go check that out at trevormuir.com/attention span. But again, I will also put that in the show notes as well. I think this is a good discussion to be having. Kids, they're still kids, and they're still amazing, and they have so much potential and capacity. We just have to create education experiences that meet that. So thanks for engaging here. Always love the joy of getting to share here on this podcast. If you liked it, please feel free to share with somebody else. My name is Trevor Muir, and this is the Epic Classroom Podcast. I'll talk to you next time.